The massive crystal dome of the Galactic Council chambers sparkled under 3 different suns, casting rainbow patterns across the assembled delegates. Ambassador Sarah Chen straightened her navy blue uniform and checked her translator one final time. Today would mark humanity's formal entry into the galactic community, something her species had worked toward for 50 years. The Zephyrian delegate, resembling a graceful swan crossed with a jellyfish, floated near the central podium. Its voice carried the musical quality typical of its race. We welcome the humans of Earth to our peaceful collective. Your species has shown remarkable diplomatic restraint during the probationary period. Sarah smiled politely, though she noticed how the other species kept their distance. The insectoid Krathari clicked their mandibles nervously whenever she moved. The plant-like Verdani actually rustled their leaves in what she'd learned was their equivalent of anxious whispering. Even the massive rock-bodied titans seemed to shift uncomfortably on their stone pedestals. "Thank you for this honor," Sarah replied. Her words translated into 17 different languages simultaneously. Humanity looks forward to contributing to galactic peace and prosperity. The Altarian Chancellor, a being of pure energy contained within a crystalline framework, pulsed with what Sarah had learned, indicated satisfaction. Your species' psychological profiles indicate optimal compatibility with our civilization. Humans demonstrate classic prey species characteristics: strong social bonds, cooperative tendencies, conflict avoidance, and emotional regulation. These traits have served our alliance well for millennia. Sarah's smile never wavered, though something cold settled in her stomach. Prey species? She'd read the xenobiology reports, of course. The galaxy was dominated by what Earth scientists had classified as herbivore-descended species. Beings whose ancestors had survived through hiding, cooperation, and submission to stronger predators. Their advanced civilizations had grown from these roots, creating a peaceful confederation built on consensus and mutual support. "We appreciate the Council's confidence," she said carefully. The Kelrian representative, a beautiful creature with iridescent scales and large, gentle eyes, spoke next. "The integration process will be gradual, of course. We understand that some human behaviors may need adjustment. Your species' history shows concerning levels of interpersonal violence, though our psychologists assure us this stems from evolutionary pressure that no longer applies in civilized society." Sarah felt her jaw tighten slightly. The Council had spent 3 years studying human psychology, culture, and biology. Their conclusions had been thorough, and she was beginning to realize completely wrong. "Human aggression appears to be largely ceremonial," continued the Kelrian, consulting a holographic display. "Your sports and competitive games serve as healthy outlets for primitive urges. We're confident that exposure to galactic civilization will naturally reduce these behaviors to negligible levels within a few generations." The Chancellor pulsed again. "Your admission to the Council comes with certain responsibilities, naturally. Human military forces will be limited to system defense only. The galaxy has moved beyond the need for standing armies. Our automated defense networks and peaceful conflict resolution protocols have maintained order for over 2,000 years. Sarah nodded, though her mind was racing. The Council's peaceful conflict resolution essentially meant submission to whoever was strongest, which worked fine when everyone was naturally non-aggressive. But they had no concept of what happened when someone refused to submit. "Of course," the Zephyrian added, "humans will need to undergo behavioral modification therapy to address residual predator traits. Nothing invasive, simply educational programs to help your species understand that violence is never the answer to any problem." "I see," Sarah said slowly. "And what about self-defense?" The question seemed to confuse the assembled delegates. The Krathari clicked rapidly among themselves before their speaker responded. "Self-defense against what?" "Crime has been virtually eliminated through proper social conditioning. Natural predators are extinct or contained on preservation worlds. What could threaten a sapient being in civilized space?" Sarah looked around the chamber at these beautiful, peaceful beings who ruled a galaxy, spanning thousands of worlds. They lived in a universe without war, without crime, without violence of any kind. They had created something humanity could only dream of. True, lasting peace. They had also created something else, a civilization completely unprepared for anything that threatened that peace. "What happens if someone refuses to follow Council directives?" she asked, another confused pause. "Why would they?" the Chancellor responded. "The Council exists to serve all member species. Our decisions are based on careful analysis and consensus building. Refusal would be illogical. Sarah realized then that the Council's understanding of humanity was like a child's understanding of fire. They saw the light and warmth, but had no concept of what it could become under the right conditions. They thought they were adopting helpful neighbors who would fit neatly into their perfect civilization. They had no idea they were inviting apex predators to dinner. There is one final matter, the Altarian Chancellor said, its energy form brightening. Our sensors detected some unusual readings during your ship's approach. Specifically, elevated electromagnetic activity that doesn't match any known propulsion or communication system. Our technicians are curious about the nature of these signals. Sarah's blood turned to ice. Those readings weren't from ship systems. They were from the emergency beacon network humanity had quietly established throughout this sector of space. Hidden relay stations that could carry a message back to Earth faster than any ship could travel. A message that once sent could never be taken back? Oh, that's just navigational equipment, she said, hoping her voice sounded steadier than she felt. Human ships use slightly different sensor arrays than galactic standard. The explanation seemed to satisfy them. Of course it did. Why would peaceful prey species lie? As the ceremony continued with formal documents and ceremonial exchanges, Sarah found herself studying each species with new eyes. The Krathari's mandibles weren't just communication tools. They were designed for cutting vegetation, utterly useless as weapons. The Verdani literally couldn't move quickly enough to pose a threat to anything. Even the mighty titans, for all their size and strength, were gentle giants whose culture forbade raising a hand against any living being. Beautiful, peaceful, completely, utterly defenseless. The ceremony concluded with what the Council called the Harmony Ritual, each species sharing a moment of their cultural music or art. When Sarah's turn came, she played a recording of a human orchestra performing Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. The assembled delegates listened in wonder to the soaring melodies and complex harmonies. None of them recognized it as a war song. None of them understood that Ode to Joy had once rallied armies and toppled empires. They heard only beauty and cooperation, never guessing that the same species capable of creating such art could also create such destruction. As the session ended and delegates began to disperse, Sarah touched her wrist communicator 3 times in a specific pattern. Somewhere in space, a tiny beacon received the signal and began transmitting a single word toward Earth. Pray. 3 months after the ceremony, Ambassador Chen had settled into her new quarters on Harmony Station, the Council's administrative center. The living arrangements were luxurious by any standard. Vast windows overlooking a binary star system, climate controls that could simulate any environment from Earth, and access to the galaxy's greatest library of knowledge. It was also, she had quietly determined, a prison. The integration is proceeding wonderfully, Dr. Valnara told her during their weekly session. The Kelrian psychologist's scales shimmered with what Chen had learned indicated pleasure. Your stress indicators have decreased significantly since arrival. The elimination of competitive pressures is already having a positive effect on human psychology. Chen nodded and smiled, though she knew the readings were false. She'd learned to control her biological responses during her military training decades ago. Keeping her heart rate steady and her skin temperature constant while lying to an alien therapist was child's play, compared to some of the things she'd done in Earth's final wars. I do feel more peaceful, she said, choosing her words carefully. Though I confess, I sometimes wonder about the other human colonies. Are they adapting as well? Oh yes, Dr. Valnara consulted her notes. The agricultural colony on Kepler 442b has exceeded all production expectations. The research station on Proxima Centauri C has already contributed 3 significant discoveries to our scientific database. Your species has such wonderful potential when properly guided. Chen's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Properly guided. As if humans were wayward children who needed gentle correction rather than a spacefaring civilization that had clawed its way up from Stone Age hunters to interstellar travelers in less than 10,000 years. What about Earth itself? She asked. I haven't received any direct communications from home since the ceremony. That's part of the integration process, the Kelrian explained patiently. New species often experience anxiety when maintaining too many ties to their homeworld. The Council has found it better to allow gradual separation, letting natural assimilation occur. Don't worry. Earth is thriving under Council guidance. The agricultural reforms alone have eliminated hunger, and the peacekeeping initiatives have ended all military conflict. Chen felt something cold and sharp twist in her chest. Ended all military conflict? How? Simple disarmament protocols. Without weapons, conflict becomes impossible. Your leaders were initially resistant, but our psychological adjustment programs helped them understand the benefits of true peace. The room seemed to grow colder despite the perfect climate control. Chen had been gone for only 3 months, but in that time, the Council had somehow convinced Earth to abandon its entire military structure. Every weapon, every soldier, every defensive system that had taken centuries to build and perfect. That's remarkable, she managed. Indeed, the transformation has been so successful that we're implementing similar programs throughout human-settled space. Within a year, your entire species will be fully integrated into galactic civilization. No more wars, no more weapons, no more violence of any kind. Dr. Vale Nara paused, her large eyes studying Chen's face. You seem distressed. This is normal. Many species experience nostalgia for their primitive past during integration. Would you like to discuss what you're feeling? Chen forced her breathing to remain steady. I suppose I'm just curious about the process. How exactly do you convince an entire species to abandon their defenses? Oh, it's quite elegant, the psychologist said proudly. We begin with economic incentives, access to advanced technology and trade networks in exchange for military reduction. Then we introduce cultural exchange programs that demonstrate the benefits of peaceful cooperation. Finally, we use targeted social conditioning to reinforce nonviolent behavior patterns. Social conditioning? Modified atmospheric processors that release behavioral adjustment compounds into urban centers. Completely harmless, of course. They simply reduce aggressive impulses and enhance cooperative tendencies. Your brain chemistry adapts within weeks, making violence literally unthinkable. Chen's blood turned to ice, but she kept her expression neutral. How fascinating. And this works on all species? Without exception. Though humans have proven remarkably receptive, your neural pathways are quite malleable compared to most species we've encountered. The session continued for another hour, with Dr. Vale Nara explaining the wonderful future awaiting humanity. A future where humans would take their place as productive citizens of a peaceful galaxy, contributing their creativity and adaptability, while abandoning the violent tendencies that had scarred their primitive past. When Chen finally returned to her quarters, she immediately began a careful inspection for surveillance devices. She found 17 different types of monitoring equipment, from simple audio pickups to sophisticated neural activity scanners. The Council wasn't just observing her, they were studying her like a laboratory specimen. That night, she lay awake staring at the alien stars through her window, thinking about Dr. Vale Nara's casual mention of atmospheric processors. Chemical mind control deployed against entire populations, presented as a gift rather than an attack. Earth's governments wouldn't have seen it coming because they had no reference point for such a thing. Who would suspect that first contact would come with invisible chains? The next morning brought news that made her stomach clench with dread. The Verdani delegate announced during the daily briefing that communication arrays throughout human space were being upgraded to Council standards. More efficient, more reliable, and of course completely integrated with galactic networks. Chen understood immediately. The Council was cutting off human colonies from each other and from Earth, replacing their communication systems with networks they controlled. Within months, every human settlement would be isolated, dependent on Council infrastructure, and completely vulnerable to whatever the aliens decided to do next. She thought about the beacon network humanity had secretly established, the hidden relay stations that could carry messages faster than ships. If they still existed, if the Council hadn't found them yet, there might be a way to warn Earth before it was too late. But first, she needed to understand exactly what was happening to her species. That afternoon, she volunteered for additional integration activities, offering to visit other human settlements to document their progress. The Council was delighted by her enthusiasm. Such dedication, the Chancellor pulsed approvingly. This is exactly the kind of cooperative spirit we hope to see from humanity. Your species' natural curiosity will serve the galaxy well. Chen smiled and nodded, already planning her route. She would visit every human colony in the sector, document what the Council was doing to them, and find a way to get that information back to Earth, if there was still time to save her species from a fate worse than conquest. The Council thought they had adopted helpful neighbors. They thought they had gained productive new citizens. For their perfect civilization, they had no idea they had just declared war on the most dangerous predators the galaxy had ever seen, and somewhere in the depths of space, hidden relay beacons continued to pulse with a simple message. Pray. A message that would soon reach ears capable of understanding its true meaning. The hunt was about to begin. Chen's tour of human settlements began with New Geneva, a research colony that had once housed 3,000 of Earth's brightest scientists. The transport ship that carried her there was a marvel of alien technology, silent, efficient, and completely unarmed. Like everything else in Council space, it had been designed by species that couldn't conceive of violence. Your scientists have made remarkable progress, said Commander Thalik, a Krathari military officer who served as Chen's escort. His mandibles clicked rhythmically as he spoke. A sign she'd learned indicated satisfaction. They've adapted beautifully to peaceful research methodologies. Chen looked out the viewport at New Geneva as they approached. The colony had been transformed. Where once stood functional research buildings and defensive barriers, there were now graceful spires that seemed to grow from the ground like crystal flowers. Beautiful, certainly, but utterly indefensible. It's very different, she said carefully. The architectural modifications were necessary, Commander Thalik explained. Human structures were far too aggressive in design. All those straight lines and angular shapes promoted combative thinking. The new buildings encourage harmony and cooperation. They landed at what had once been the main research complex. Chen was greeted by Dr. Miranda Walsh, who had been the colony's chief administrator. The woman's appearance shocked Chen. Where once Walsh had been sharp-eyed and energetic, she now seemed almost ethereal, her movements slow, and her expression beatifically calm. Sarah. Walsh's voice carried an odd, dreamy quality.
How wonderful to see you.
Isn't this place beautiful now? I can barely remember why we ever thought we needed those ugly barriers and weapon emplacements. Chen felt her stomach tighten. The changes are certainly dramatic. How are the research projects going? Oh, we've moved beyond such aggressive pursuits, Walsh said with a serene smile. Competition breeds violence, you know. We focus now on collaborative harmony studies and peaceful applications of natural phenomena. The Council has been so helpful in redirecting our primitive impulses. As Walsh led her through the colony, Chen began to understand the true horror of what was happening. The humans she met seemed happy, genuinely peaceful and content. They showed no signs of physical distress or obvious mental manipulation, but their eyes held the vacant satisfaction of lobotomized patients. The transition was difficult at first, Walsh admitted as they passed a group of former weapons researchers who were now tending gardens. Some of our people resisted the atmospheric adjustments, but the Council's medical staff was very understanding. They helped the resistors overcome their violent tendencies with specialized therapy. What kind of therapy? Chen asked. Neural pathway modification, Walsh replied matter-of-factly. They identified the brain structures responsible for aggressive thoughts and gently adjusted them. Completely painless, and the results are wonderful. No one here has had a violent thought in months. Chen's blood went cold. Neural pathway modification. They weren't just drugging humans into compliance. They were performing surgery on their brains, removing the very capacity for aggression. Turning Homo sapiens into something else entirely. Where are Dr. Reeves and his team? She asked. Reeves had been New Geneva's military liaison, responsible for defensive strategies. Walsh looked confused for a moment, as if trying to remember something from a half-forgotten dream. I think there was an accident? The Council investigator said something about equipment malfunction. Very sad. But these things happen when primitive technologies interact with advanced systems. Chen realized with growing horror that anyone who might have resisted or questioned the changes had simply disappeared. Accidents, equipment failures, sudden illnesses. The Council had cleaned house with surgical precision, eliminating potential troublemakers while making it look like natural causes. That evening, alone in her assigned quarters, Chen activated a hidden scanning device built into her uniform's collar pin. The readings confirmed her worst fears. The colony's atmosphere was saturated with behavioral modification compounds, but that was only the beginning. The very structure of the buildings was embedded with neural influence, technology, subtle electromagnetic fields that affected human brain chemistry at the cellular level. The humans of New Geneva weren't just being controlled, they were being rewritten. She spent 3 days documenting the changes, carefully recording conversations and taking atmospheric readings. By the time she left, she had compiled evidence of what amounted to genocide, the systematic elimination of human nature itself. Her next stop was New Sparta, a military colony that had once served as humanity's forward defense post in this sector. If the Council had pacified New Geneva's scientists, what had they done to humanity's warriors? The answer became clear as soon as her transport entered the system. There was no colony. New Sparta had been completely destroyed, its orbital stations reduced to debris, its planetary installations nothing but craters. When she asked Commander Thalek about it, his mandibles clicked in what she now recognized as embarrassment. "Unfortunate," he said. "The humans there proved resistant to integration. They refused atmospheric treatment and actually fired on Council medical ships attempting to render assistance. We had no choice but to implement containment protocols." Containment protocols? Complete sterilization of the system. The Council takes biological contamination very seriously. We couldn't risk aggressive tendencies spreading to other populations. Chen stared at the debris field that had once been home to 50,000 humans. The Council's definition of containment was genocide. They had murdered an entire colony because its people had refused to submit to chemical lobotomization. How many other systems required? Containment? She asked carefully. Commander Thalek consulted his datapad. 7 so far. All small military installations or research posts focused on weapons development. The larger civilian colonies have been much more cooperative. 7 systems. 7 human colonies wiped from existence because they had dared to resist. Hundreds of thousands of people murdered by species that claimed to have evolved beyond violence. The irony was staggering. These peaceful aliens had just committed acts of genocide that would have made Earth's worst warmongers seem gentle by comparison. And they saw it as a medical necessity, no different from sterilizing a wound. That night, Chen made her decision. She had to warn Earth, had to get word to the colonies that hadn't yet been integrated. But the Council controlled all communication networks, monitored all ship movements, tracked every piece of technology in human space, except for one thing. The beacon network that humanity had established in secret, using technology the Council didn't recognize or understand. If those relay stations were still active, still hidden from alien sensors, she might be able to get a message through, but she would need to reach one of the beacon stations personally. And that meant escaping from Council custody without alerting them to her intentions. As she lay in her quarters aboard the transport ship, staring at the cold stars beyond the viewport, Chen began planning the most important mission of her life. She would break free from her alien captors, reach the beacon network, and warn humanity that the galaxy's great peace was built on the bones of anyone who dared to resist. The Council thought they were saving humanity from its violent nature. They thought they were offering the gift of eternal peace. They were about to learn the difference between peaceful and helpless. And somewhere in the darkness between stars, hidden beacons continued their patient pulse, waiting for someone to tell them that the time for peace had ended. Chen's opportunity came during their approach to Kepler 442b, the agricultural colony the Council had praised so highly. As their transport entered the system's outer asteroid belt, she excused herself to use the ship's hygiene facilities. The Chthari and their alien allies had many advanced technologies, but they still hadn't mastered the art of surveillance in private spaces, their own. Psychology made them uncomfortable with such invasiveness. She had perhaps 10 minutes before Commander Thalek would notice her absence. Moving quickly but quietly, Chen made her way to the ship's engineering section. Her years in Earth's military had included training on alien technology acquired through various diplomatic channels. The Council ships were sophisticated, but their designers had never considered the possibility of sabotage by passengers. She found the navigation computer and carefully inserted a data spike she'd hidden in her medical scanner. The spike contained a virus her techs had developed years ago, designed to mimic the harmless data corruption that occasionally affected ships traveling through certain types of stellar radiation. The virus would wait until they were in orbit around Kepler 442b, then gradually degrade the ship's positioning systems. Nothing dangerous, just enough to force an emergency landing for repairs, and Chen knew exactly where she wanted them to land. 26 hours later, as their transport struggled with increasingly erratic navigation readings, Commander Thalik made the decision Chen had been hoping for. "We'll need to set down for system diagnostics," he clicked apologetically. "The stellar radiation in this system appears more active than our charts indicated. We can land near the colony's main settlement while my technicians run repairs." Chen nodded sympathetically, though her heart was racing. According to her hidden scans, there was an inactive beacon relay station approximately 50 kilometers from the colony's central hub, disguised as a geological survey marker. If she could reach it undetected, she could transmit a priority message that would reach Earth within days rather than months. The agricultural colony was a horror show disguised as paradise. Rolling fields of golden grain stretched to the horizon, tended by humans whose movements had the mechanical precision of automation. The colonists smiled constantly, their faces blank with chemically induced contentment as they worked in perfect synchronization. "Remarkable productivity," Commander Thalik observed as they toured the facilities. "Human agricultural output has increased by 300% since atmospheric optimization began. Your species has such potential when properly guided." Chen watched a group of former farmers, people she had known as passionate, argumentative, fiercely independent, work their fields with the mindless efficiency of machines. They showed no recognition when she spoke to them, only polite smiles and vacant stares. "How long did the optimization process take?" she asked. "Only 6 weeks," their escort, a Verdani administrator, rustled proudly. "Much faster than projections suggested. Humans adapt remarkably well to neurological adjustment." That evening, Chen attended a community gathering in what had once been the colony's town hall. Hundreds of humans sat in perfect rows, listening with identical expressions of peaceful attention as a Zephyrian speaker explained the benefits of galactic citizenship. No one fidgeted. No one whispered to their neighbors. No one showed the slightest trace of independent thought. It was then that Chen noticed something that made her blood freeze. Among the crowd, she recognized faces from the missing resistance groups, people who had been reported as casualties of equipment failures and medical emergencies. They were alive, but their eyes held the same empty serenity as everyone else. The council wasn't just eliminating resistors, they were converting them. After the gathering, Chen made her excuses about needing rest and returned to her assigned quarters. She waited until the deep of night, then slipped out through a window she had carefully left unsealed earlier. The colony's security was virtually non-existent. Why guard against violence when your population was incapable of aggressive thoughts? The journey to the beacon station took her 3 hours through unfamiliar terrain. She moved carefully using techniques learned in a dozen covert operations on Earth. The alien guards were skilled, but they had no experience tracking an apex predator who didn't want to be found. She found the beacon exactly where intelligence reports had placed it, an innocuous metal cylinder, buried among ordinary survey equipment. Chen's hands shook as she activated the hidden transmitter, entering her authentication codes and priority encryption keys. The message she sent was brief but comprehensive. Locations of surviving human colonies, evidence of neural modification programs, details of the atmospheric control systems, and most importantly, proof that the Council's integration program was actually systematic genocide disguised as medical treatment. She concluded with a simple recommendation: implement Omega Protocol immediately. The galaxy is not what we thought. Humanity is alone. Omega Protocol, the darkest contingency plan in Earth's military archives, developed during the final wars when extinction seemed inevitable. Plans for turning humanity's entire civilization into a weapon, capable of fighting any enemy, no matter how advanced or numerous. Plans that assumed humanity might someday face an enemy that could only be defeated by embracing everything that made humans terrifying. The transmission took 8 minutes to encode and send. Chen spent another hour carefully covering her tracks, making it appear as though she had never left the colony. By the time she returned to her quarters, the beacon had already relayed her message to the next station in the network. beginning a chain reaction that would reach Earth in less than 72 hours. The next morning brought news that confirmed her worst fears. Commander Thalik announced during breakfast that communication arrays throughout human space had experienced technical difficulties. Direct contact between colonies and Earth had been temporarily suspended while Council technicians implemented improvements to the network. Chen realized the Council had been coordinating their operations carefully. While she toured colonies and documented their crimes, they had been systematically isolating human settlements, cutting off communication, and preparing for the final phase of their integration program. But they had made one crucial mistake. They had assumed that humans, like every other species they had encountered, would accept defeat once resistance seemed hopeless. They had no concept of what humanity did when backed into a corner. As Chen sat in the transport ship, watching Kepler 442b shrink behind them, she thought about the message racing through space toward Earth, about the military commanders and political leaders who would read it and understand that first contact had been a trap, about the scientists and engineers who would receive activation codes for projects that had been theoretical nightmares, about a species of persistence, hunters who had climbed to the top of one food chain and were about to discover what it took to dominate another. The Council thought they had seen human nature. They thought they understood what Homo sapiens were capable of. They had studied humanity's art, its culture, its peaceful aspirations, and concluded that humans were just another prey species in need of guidance. They were about to learn the difference between civilization and capability. Behind Chen's ship, the beacon station powered down and returned to dormancy, its mission complete, but across the galaxy, other beacons began receiving and retransmitting a signal that would change everything. The hunt was about to begin. 3 days after Chen's message reached Earth, every human ship in space received the same transmission on emergency frequencies. The message was simple. Come home now, no questions. Captain Maria Santos of the cargo hauler New Horizon was finishing a routine supply run to the Verdani agricultural worlds when the signal came through. She stared at the authentication codes for a long moment, recognizing protocols that were supposed to be used only if humanity faced extinction. All cargo ships, she transmitted on an encrypted channel. This is Santos. Anyone else get the recall order? Responses flooded in from across the sector. Dozens of human vessels, from massive colony ships to small research craft, all receiving the same impossible instruction. Return to Earth immediately, abandoning whatever missions or contracts they were fulfilling. It's gotta be a mistake, transmitted Captain Wong from the survey ship Darwin's Dream. My mission here has 18 months remaining. Earth Command wouldn't recall the entire fleet unless... He didn't finish the thought. They all understood the implication. The only scenario that called for total fleet recall was preparation for war. But war against whom? The galaxy was at peace. The Council maintained order through gentle guidance and mutual cooperation. There hadn't been a significant military conflict in over 2,000 years. Santos made her decision. I'm heading home. Whatever's happening, Earth Command doesn't issue Omega recalls for supply runs gone wrong. Across human space, captains and crew members began the long journey back to Sol system. They abandoned mining operations, broke off trade negotiations, and left diplomatic missions incomplete. Within hours, humanity's presence in the wider galaxy began to contract like a tide pulling back from the shore. On Earth, the message Chen had transmitted through the beacon network had triggered protocols that most government officials had hoped never to see activated. In underground bunkers and hidden facilities around the world, systems that had been dormant for decades began powering up. Admiral Rebecca Harrison stood in the war room beneath the Swiss Alps, watching as status boards that had shown green for 50 years began cycling through amber and red. Around her, military officers who had trained for scenarios they prayed would never happen began implementing plans that violated every treaty humanity had signed with the galactic community. Atmospheric processors are coming online, reported Colonel Kim from the engineering station. Full deployment across all major population centers within 6 hours. Fleet status? Harrison asked. 83% recall completion. All ships carrying Omega packages have received activation codes. Construction yards report military production will begin as soon as raw materials arrive. Harrison nodded grimly. The Omega packages. hidden military systems installed on every human ship as an insurance policy against unknown threats, weapons and sensors disguised as normal equipment, waiting for the day humanity might need to fight for survival. "What about the colonies?" she asked. 17 settlements have acknowledged recall orders. 5 are maintaining communication silence. We assume they've been compromised. 3 report they're under direct council observation and cannot comply without detection. The Admiral studied the tactical display showing human settlements scattered across dozens of star systems. Red markers indicated colonies that had gone silent or showed signs of alien interference. Green markers showed settlements that were still free but increasingly isolated as the Council tightened its control. "Begin Phase 2, she ordered. Across Earth, the transformation began. Atmospheric processors that had once cleaned pollution from the air now began releasing different compounds. Chemicals designed to enhance human aggression, sharpen reflexes, and boost adrenaline production. Within hours, 5 billion humans began experiencing the biological changes that had once helped their ancestors dominate a hostile world. In orbit, automated construction yards that had built peaceful cargo ships and research vessels suddenly retooled their assembly lines. The blueprints they now followed had been hidden in their systems for decades, waiting for activation. Ships began taking shape that looked nothing like humanity's previous designs: sleek, angular craft optimized for speed and lethality, rather than comfort and efficiency. But the most significant changes were happening in the minds of Earth's population. As the atmospheric compounds took effect, humans began remembering things they had tried to forget. The killer instincts that civilization had suppressed, the pack-hunting behaviors that had carried Homo sapiens from African grasslands to galactic civilization. Dr. Elena Vasquez, Earth's leading xenobiologist, felt the change herself as she worked in her laboratory. The careful scientific detachment she had maintained for years began giving way to something harder, more focused. When she looked at the alien psychological profiles the Council had prepared for humanity, she no longer saw academic curiosity about interspecies relations. She saw intelligence on the enemy. "They think we're prey," she said to her research team, who were experiencing similar mental shifts. "Look at their analysis. Classic prey species characteristics. They've categorized us with creatures that survive by hiding and running." "Maybe that's what they need to believe," suggested Dr. Park, his voice carrying a new edge. "Maybe it's better if they underestimate us." Vasquez pulled up genetic analysis of the Council species. Data humanity had been politely requested not to study too closely during the integration process. Now she looked at it with predator's eyes, searching for weaknesses rather than similarities. "Fascinating," she murmured. "The Krithari have no concept of individual combat. Their entire social structure is based on submission to authority. The Verdani literally cannot move fast enough to respond to sudden threats. The Zephyrians have never developed resistance to toxins because their homeworld has no natural poisons." Her team began compiling a target analysis that would have horrified them just days before. Biological vulnerabilities, psychological blind spots, technological dependencies. Everything that made the Council species magnificent civilizers also made them helpless against a determined attacker. Meanwhile, in space, the first human ships to receive Omega activation began their transformation. Captain Santos watched in amazement as her cargo hauler's hidden systems revealed themselves. Walls slid away to expose weapon mounts. Engine cowlings retracted to show military-grade drive systems. Her slow, peaceful cargo ship suddenly had the acceleration and firepower of a battlecruiser. "My God," she whispered as her ship's computer displayed its new capabilities. "We've been flying warships disguised as freighters." The revelation sent shockwaves through the returning fleet. Every human vessel, cargo hauler, passenger liner, research ship, mining barge, carried hidden military systems sophisticated enough to outfight anything in the Council fleet. Humanity had been preparing for galactic war while publicly embracing galactic peace. On Harmony Station, Ambassador Chen felt the change beginning in her own metabolism, as trace amounts of the atmospheric compounds reached the station through the life support systems. Her thinking became clearer, her reflexes sharper. The careful diplomatic restraint she had maintained for months began giving way to tactical calculation. She looked at Commander Thalek with new eyes, seeing not an escort, but a target. The Krithari officer's mandibles, impressive for cutting vegetation, would shatter against human bone. His compound eyes, perfect for detecting movement in vegetation, had blind spots that a trained human could exploit. His exoskeleton, designed to protect against environmental hazards, would crumple under the impact forces a human could generate. "Is something wrong, Ambassador?" the commander asked, his mandibles clicking with concern. "Your bio readings show unusual activity." Chen smiled, and for the first time in months it was completely genuine. "Just excited about returning to Earth," she said. "I have so much to report to my superiors." As her transport continued toward Sol System, Chen began planning how she would kill every alien on the ship and steal it for humanity's use. Not because she wanted to, but because her transformed brain now saw it as a viable tactical option. The Council's careful plans for human integration had assumed they were dealing with a species capable of violence but committed to peace. They had never considered the possibility that humanity's commitment to peace was a choice rather than an inability. They were about to learn what humans became when they chose war. Instead, Earth's recall signal continued, broadcasting across the galaxy, calling humanity home for the greatest hunt in their species' history. The age of galactic peace was ending, though the Council didn't know it yet. They would soon. The first sign of trouble came when human colonies throughout the galaxy suddenly went silent. Not the gradual communication degradation the Council had been implementing, but complete immediate blackout. Within 72 hours, every human settlement simply stopped transmitting. Chancellor Veltar pulsed with confusion in the emergency session of the Galactic Council. The crystalline being's energy patterns showed the electromagnetic equivalent of panic. "This is unprecedented. Entire populations don't simply vanish. Our monitoring stations show the colonies still exist, but all communication has ceased." Commander Thalek clicked his mandibles nervously. "My escort ship lost contact with Ambassador Chen's transport 6 hours ago. The vessel simply disappeared from our sensors mid-journey." The Verdani representative rustled her leaves in distress. "Our agricultural worlds report that human cargo ships have abandoned their delivery routes. Contracts worth millions of credits, simply ignored without explanation. What they didn't know was that humanity had implemented a strategy their peaceful minds couldn't comprehend. Every human settlement had received the same coded instruction: go dark. Cease all communication. Activate hidden defenses. Prepare for war." On New Terra, one of humanity's largest colonies, the transformation had begun the moment Admiral Harrison's recall signal arrived. Colonel Janet Morrison, the settlement's hidden military commander, stood in a control room that hadn't existed a week ago. What had appeared to be a civilian administration center now revealed its true nature: a military command post equipped with tactical bar systems the Council had never suspected. "Stealth fields are operational," reported Lieutenant Chen. "No relation to the Ambassador. Council sensors show us as a normal agricultural settlement. They have no idea we've armed every building and turned the entire colony into a fortress." Morrison studied the tactical display showing Council ships throughout the system. 3 monitoring stations, 2 patrol vessels, and 1 heavy cruiser that served as the sector headquarters, all of them completely unaware that they were now surrounded by predators. "What about civilian evacuation?" she asked. "Complete. Every non-combatant has been relocated to underground shelters designed to look like mining operations. If the Council scans us, they'll see exactly what they expect: humans digging in the dirt like good little prey species." The irony was deliberate. Humanity had spent decades building an elaborate deception, appearing to fulfill every stereotype the Council had about prey species, while secretly preparing for the day they might need to reveal their true nature. Every human colony had hidden weapons, concealed military installations, and underground bunkers capable of withstanding orbital bombardment. Meanwhile, in space, the human fleet had completed its transformation. Captain Santos stood on the bridge of what had once been the cargo hauler New Horizon, and was now the assault vessel Fury Unleashed. Around her, displays showed the locations of every Council ship in the sector, none of them armed for combat because the galaxy's peaceful species saw no need for weapons of war. "Fleet status report," she ordered. 47 vessels in attack formation," replied Commander Torres. "All ships report weapons online and stealth systems operational. The Council fleet remains unaware of our presence." Santos nodded grimly. Earth's recall order had been accompanied by specific tactical instructions. The human fleet was to position itself throughout Council space, waiting for the signal that would begin humanity's counterattack. They were outnumbered 1,000 to 1, but they had advantages their enemies couldn't imagine. Speed, aggression, the willingness to do what peaceful species considered unthinkable. On Harmony Station, Ambassador Chen had begun her own private war. The atmospheric compounds finally reaching the station had triggered changes in her brain chemistry that made her previous diplomatic restraint seem like a childhood memory. She looked at the aliens around her and saw not potential friends, but obstacles to be eliminated. The opportunity came during what the council called a harmony ceremony, a gathering where representatives of different species shared cultural elements to promote understanding. Chen watched as the assembled aliens performed their peaceful rituals, completely oblivious to the predator moving among them. When her turn came, she stood before the assembled delegates and smiled. "I'd like to share something from human culture," she said. "It's called a war song." She began to sing the battle hymn of the Republic, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustics. The alien delegates listened with polite attention, having no idea they were hearing a song that had once rallied armies and toppled governments. To their ears, it was simply another example of humanity's artistic nature. But the human support staff throughout the station heard something different. Hidden in the melody's cadence were activation codes for the emergency systems they had secretly installed over months of careful preparation. As Chen's voice filled the chamber, weapons came online, defense fields activated, and communication jammers began broadcasting. "Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord," she sang, and throughout the station, humans began moving to predetermined positions. "He is trampling out the vintage where the grapes of wrath are stored," and security doors that had seemed decorative suddenly revealed their true function as blast barriers. "He hath loosed the fateful lightning of his terrible swift sword." And the council delegates finally began to understand that something was wrong. But by then, it was far too late. The transformation was complete in minutes. Harmony Station, the symbol of galactic peace and cooperation, had become humanity's first fortress in enemy territory. Every alien on the station was now a prisoner, and the most important communication hub in council space belonged to the species they had tried to domesticate. Commander Thalek stared at Chen in shock, his mandibles clicking frantically. "What have you done? This is madness. The council will never tolerate violence against civilians." Chen's smile was predatory. "Commander, you're thinking like prey. The council won't tolerate this because they can't. Violence is literally outside their psychological framework, but that's what makes it so effective." She gestured to the human crew members who had revealed themselves as soldiers. "Your species spent 2,000 years believing that superior technology and peaceful intentions were enough to maintain order. You never prepared for someone who simply refused to be peaceful." The Altarian Chancellor pulsed desperately, its energy form flickering with distress. "This is a misunderstanding. Humans are an integrated species. You've undergone behavioral modification. Violence should be impossible for you." "That's your second mistake," Chen replied. "You assumed that because we appeared peaceful, we were harmless. You confuse civilization with weakness, but humans have been pretending to be domesticated for our entire relationship with the Council." She walked to the chamber's main display and activated a transmission system that reached every Council world in the galaxy. "Citizens of the Galactic Council, this is Ambassador Sarah Chen of Earth. I have an announcement." Her image appeared on screens throughout Council space. Billions of peaceful beings who had never seen aggression directed toward them personally. What they saw was a human who no longer bothered to hide what her species really was. "The age of galactic peace is over," she announced. "Humanity rejects the Council's authority and declares our independence from your integration protocols. Any attempt to interfere with human colonies or ships will be met with immediate military response." The reaction was exactly what she expected: panic, confusion, complete inability to process the concept that someone might simply choose to fight rather than submit to superior authority. But in the depths of space, hidden throughout Council territory, 47 human warships received Chen's transmission as the signal they had been waiting for. The hunt had begun. Within hours, every Council monitoring station in human space simply vanished. Not destroyed, but completely disappeared from sensors as human stealth technology engaged. Council patrol ships found themselves alone in systems they thought they controlled, cut off from communication with their headquarters, surrounded by enemies they couldn't detect. The species that had brought peace to the galaxy was about to learn what happened when that peace was challenged by beings who had evolved to hunt in packs. The Council's response to humanity's Declaration of Independence was exactly what Earth Command had predicted. Complete psychological collapse. Within 6 hours of Chen's broadcast, every major Council world descended into chaos. Not violence, their species were literally incapable of that, but total societal breakdown as beings who had lived their entire lives in perfect peace suddenly faced a threat they couldn't understand or counter. On the Krathari homeworld, millions of insectoids huddled in their hive complexes, clicking helplessly as their leaders struggled to formulate any response beyond negotiate. The concept of fighting back simply didn't exist in their psychological framework. When their military advisors suggested deploying defensive measures, the government leaders asked what they were supposed to defend against. After all, humans were supposed to be peaceful prey species. The Verdani were even more helpless. Their plant-based biology made rapid response impossible, and their cultural tendency toward consensus building meant every decision required months of careful deliberation. By the time they could agree on what the human threat represented, the war would be over. But it was the Zephyrians who truly revealed the Council's weakness. These graceful, ethereal beings who had served as the galaxy's diplomats and mediators possessed minds capable of incredible complexity and nuance. They could negotiate settlements between dozens of competing interests and craft treaties that satisfied every party. What they couldn't do was comprehend anyone who simply refused to negotiate. Admiral Harrison watched the intelligence reports flowing in from human agents throughout Council space. Every monitoring station had been captured or destroyed. Every patrol ship had been eliminated or forced to retreat. The Council's vast network of peaceful cooperation was collapsing like a house of cards because it had no contingency for sustained resistance. Phase 3 status report, she ordered from her command center. Beneath the Alps, all primary objectives secured, reported Colonel
Kim. We control every major communication
hub in the outer territories. Council forces are completely cut off from Central Command. 36 Council worlds have requested immediate negotiations. What about the core systems? Harrison asked. Minimal resistance. The Titan homeworld has declared neutrality and requested non-interference status. The Altarian Collective is offering to mediate a peaceful resolution. Only the Verdani High Council is demanding we return to integration protocols, and they've threatened to file formal complaints with the Galactic Ethics Committee. Harrison couldn't help but smile. After decades of preparing for interstellar war, the actual conflict was proving almost anticlimactic. The Council species were so fundamentally peaceful that they literally couldn't mount effective resistance. Their most aggressive response was to threaten humanity with legal action. But the real victory wasn't military, it was psychological. For the first time in galactic history, prey species were learning what it felt like to be hunted. On Harmony Station, Chen stood in the council chambers that now served as humanity's interrogation center. The alien delegates sat in stunned silence as human officers cataloged their databases, mapping every council world, every defensive installation, every resource depot. "I don't understand," the Zephyrian delegate said for the 100th time. "Why are you doing this? We offered your species paradise. Peace. An end to violence and suffering." Chen looked at the graceful being with something approaching pity. "Because paradise isn't freedom. You were going to lobotomize our entire species and call it enlightenment. We were saving you from your own violent nature. That violent nature is what makes us human," Chen replied. "Take it away and we stop being Homo sapiens. We become something else, something docile and compliant and empty." She gestured to the tactical displays showing the collapse of council authority throughout human space. "You made one critical error. You assumed that because we chose to be peaceful, we were incapable of being anything else. But choice is the key word. We chose to play nice because we thought you were honorable beings who respected our sovereignty." The Chancellor's energy form flickered weakly. "We were protecting the galaxy from chaos. Without the Council's guidance, civilization would collapse into endless warfare." "Whose civilization?" Chen asked sharply. Yours? The one built on the systematic elimination of anyone who might threaten your precious peace? You've committed genocide against dozens of species that didn't fit your model. You just called it integration. She activated a holographic display showing the restricted files they had extracted from council databases. Images of species that no longer existed. Worlds that had been sterilized when their inhabitants proved insufficiently peaceful. The Vangari Dominion, she read. A warrior culture that refused atmospheric modification, declared extinct due to biological incompatibility. The Nexan Republic. A technological civilization that wouldn't surrender their defense networks, listed as casualties of system contamination events. The alien delegates stared at the evidence of their own crimes with expressions of genuine shock. That was perhaps the most disturbing thing about them. They truly believed they were benevolent, saviors bringing order to a chaotic universe. Those species threatened galactic stability. The Verdani representative rustled weakly. They would have destroyed the peace we worked so hard to build. So you destroyed them first, Chen said. And you were going to do the same to us. The only difference is that we fought back. The final phase of Operation Omega began 72 hours after the first shot was fired. Human fleets emerged from stealth throughout Council space, appearing simultaneously over every major world. But instead of orbital bombardment or invasion, they began broadcasting a simple message. Admiral Harrison's image appeared on every screen in the galaxy as she addressed the trillions of beings who had lived their entire lives under Council protection. Citizens of the former Galactic Council, she began, humanity offers you a choice that your leaders never gave us. Submit to our authority and accept human oversight of your governments, or maintain your independence and face the consequences of resisting a species that has evolved to hunt. The message was accompanied by detailed demonstrations of human military technology, ships that could move faster than Council sensors could track, weapons that could sterilize entire worlds without leaving radioactive traces, soldiers who could infiltrate any defense system and eliminate targets with surgical precision. But the most effective demonstration was psychological. The broadcast showed footage from New Geneva and the other integrated human colonies, empty-eyed shells of people who had once been vibrant, independent thinkers. The galaxy saw what the Council's peaceful methods actually accomplished, and understood what would happen to them if they continued to resist. The surrenders began within hours. One by one, Council worlds announced their acceptance of human authority, not because they were defeated militarily, but because they finally understood they were facing a species that would not stop, would not negotiate, and would not accept anything less than total victory. The Krethari homeworld fell first, its hive-mind government collapsing when they realized resistance would result in the systematic hunting of every member of their species. The Verdani High Council took longer to surrender, but even they eventually acknowledged that their slow, consensus-based society couldn't compete with human decision-making speed. Only the Zephyrians held out until the end, desperately trying to negotiate some form of compromise. When human forces finally reached their homeworld, they found a species so psychologically broken by the concept of unavoidable conflict that most of their population had retreated into catatonic withdrawal. 6 months after Ambassador, Chen sent her first warning through the hidden beacon network. Humanity stood triumphant over a galaxy that had tried to domesticate them. The Council's 2,000-year reign of peaceful tyranny had ended not in glorious battle, but in the simple realization that some species could not be conquered by kindness. From her office in the newly established Human Colonial Administration, Chen looked out at the stars and wondered if they had become the very thing they had fought against. The galaxy was certainly more peaceful now that humanity controlled it, but it was the peace of predators who had eliminated all potential threats. Perhaps that was the real lesson of the Council's fall. Peace was not the natural state of the universe. Peace was what happened when the apex predator was strong enough to enforce it. And for better or worse, humanity was now that predator. The Council had thought they knew humans. They had seen the art, the culture, the capacity for cooperation and compassion, but they had never understood that these things existed alongside humanity's darker nature. Not instead of it. They learned the truth too late to save themselves, but just in time to ensure they would never forget it. In the end, the galaxy's greatest peace had fallen to the species that understood war better than any other, and perhaps in the twisted logic of survival, That was exactly as it should be.